Welcome to HR Voices, a podcast for independent HR and people professionals and the businesses they support. HR Voices is brought to you by the expert team at HR Independence Limited. We hope you enjoy.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the next edition of the HR Voices podcast. So today I am, as usual, joined with my partner in crime, Mary Asante. Hi Mary.
Hi Charlotte.
How are you doing?
All right, thanks. You?
Yeah, good, thank you. So we are going to talk today. We have a very exciting guest. We have Nick Poninski. Hi Nick, how are you?
Morning, Charlotte. Wonderful, thank you.
Good. Okay. And Nick is the influential consultant, which sounds very exciting. So we're going to get him to tell us a little bit more about that. Today, we are going to be talking about to niche or not to niche, which is something that comes up a lot in our forums and, with our members around how to structure their services and whether to focus in on something specific or whether to really just be open and available to all work that might come your way. So we're going to explore that a little bit because Nick has niched and is working in a very specific space. And in one of our coffee and chats recently, we got into quite a good debate around the value of niching. So we thought we'd bring this on and share it with everybody. So Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to be here. Do you know, when you introduced me as the influential consultant, I sort of cringed because I am seriously thinking about rebranding, obviously, as we spoke about before we started recording, because I'm not sure how I feel about that. But anyway, yeah, so I work specifically with HR consultants, and I work with them to help them get every client they ever want at fees that they're currently too scared to say out loud. And yeah, I work with HR consultants. For me, you guys do one of the most important jobs out there. You help an organization manage their workforce. And if that workforce isn't working to the best of its ability, then the organization can't achieve its objectives. So that's one of the reasons why I niched into HR consultants. And the other reason is that I used to work in HR myself. So I understand your world. I understand, the whole area. Well, maybe not the senior areas, but certainly the bread and butter areas.
Excellent. And so what sort of led you to step out of HR and into marketing?
So I always had a very keen interest in psychology. And when I was deciding upon my career path after I got back from 2 years living in South Korea, I wanted to do something which was helping people. And at the time, I thought that HR was the way forward. And my experience of working in HR wasn't what I thought it would be. I was more interested, I guess, in the engagement side, and that's those psychological, how do we get the best out of our people area. And what I found was perhaps, I didn't progress as quickly as I could have done or as into the area that I should have done. But I ended up doing a lot of disciplinaries, grievances, blah, blah, blah. And I didn't really enjoy it. And then lockdown hit. And yeah, before you know it, I'd stumbled across a little advert talking about copywriting. I thought, I love writing. What is copywriting? And then, I ended up moving into copywriting. And then I moved more into a marketing and sales area because once you start doing copywriting, people come to you with all sorts of questions about marketing and sales. And I'm reading all the books about marketing and sales. I'm doing all the courses about marketing and sales. And I thought, well, why am I only selling copywriting if I could sell much more? And that's what I decided to do. And then I decided to choose an audience because as far as I'm concerned, niching is essential.
I think that leads us thank you for that interesting background, Nick. And that leads nicely onto our topic for today, which is, what is niching?
What is niching? Okay, so niching is basically choosing a target audience and then serving that target audience. It's identifying a group of people, understanding their world, and then helping them solve the issues that they face. And yeah, the more you begin to understand that audience, the better you can help them, and then the better your marketing materials are, etc. So in a nutshell, that's what niching is choosing a target audience. So rather than saying, for example, that you're a copywriter, you could say that you're a direct response copywriter. You could say that you're an email copywriter and you're a funnel copywriter. But then you can go into more of a niche about not just what you do, but also in terms of who you serve. So rather than doing shoes, you could do running shoes, you could do Nike's running shoes. And before you know it, you're very niche. And yeah, ultimately, that's what niching is.
Why is it important to choose your, let's say, your target area? Why is it important to choose that, right, I produce or I specialize in selling or producing or providing running shoes for people as opposed to just shoes or even trainers generally for people? Yeah. Why is that important from your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that is, why should I bother niching, right? So yeah, ultimately it makes marketing so much more easier. Like if you have a certain audience, then you can zoom in on that audience, and it kind of makes things a lot less stressful. Like if you come to me, Mary, and you say, oh, I don't have any clients, then the world is your oyster. Well, how do you try and serve that audience? Where do you even start? How would you start creating messages? How would you narrow down where to find, some clients from? Whereas when you do choose an audience, then you know exactly what you're looking for. You can say, okay, well, I work with business consultants, but then you could even niche that down into HR consultants. And again, that makes things much more easier. When you're looking at people to add as contacts on LinkedIn, you know who you're looking for. So rather than just clicking on, any old person to connect with them, you know who you're looking for. It makes things much easier from that sense. And then also the messages that you put in front of this person to get them to say, oh, okay, maybe they know what they're talking about. Again, those messages become much more zoned in on that person's world. So, if I was to focus in, which is what I did at the start, I focused in on business consultants, and trying to get messages to business consultants is really difficult because, you can be talking about sending through proposals rather than taking people on sales calls, etc. And a lot of what business consultants do is very similar to what HR consultants do. But where I can really grab hold of a HR consultant's attention is when I put these examples into HR terms. So when I talk about, for example, the fact that, you could create a signature offer full of engagement, onboarding an engagement system, doing the first round of engagements, doing the pulse surveys, having an engagement policy, having all the procedures, and then managing that HR engagement throughout a year for a company, something very specific that you can talk about. So yeah, that for me makes things much easier.
That is good to hear, but what I also want to explore is how do you go about, because you've talked about your background and how you got to becoming the influential consultant, let's say for HR consultant, in terms of helping them with their marketing and stuff. But if, let's say, for anyone listening to us, whether they've got an HR background or whether they are thinking about starting their own consultancy, already running their business, and they are thinking about niching, how would somebody go about identifying what that target market or audience should be?
Okay, yeah, great question. So that is really it's kind of difficult for me to say without having a specific example.
Well, use that consultancy as an example. Just use one, a potential client of yours as an example.
Yeah, okay. So I was literally going through this with a client yesterday, and she does HR consulting. She also does diversity, inclusion, and equality. And she generally does this for public services. So what we talked about was, what we talk about is in terms of how to choose a target audience, what interests you, because you don't want to end up doing something that you're not interested in. So what is the work that interests you? What experiences have you got? You know, if you've mainly worked with public sector, then that can be a good area to go into. There's nothing wrong with focusing in on public sector. She'd worked the majority of the time with the NHS. So, you know, we've decided that the NHS is, it's a great target audience there. It's a huge employer. So there's nothing wrong with going for that. But the other thing that I said to her was, don't choose an industry that's on its way out, that's dying. I don't know what's going to happen with technology, but for instance, in 10 years' time, I would say that it would be remarkable if people were still driving their own cars or taxis or lorries or whatever. I would imagine we would have technology at some point. So whether or not that's going to happen is up for debate, but perhaps that might happen. So I would suggest not choosing an audience in a market that's is dying or is going through turmoil. So there's no point in that. And the other thing to consider would be, are they going to be able to pay the rates that you want to be able to charge? Because if you're going to choose, work that can't afford to pay you, that's going to be, you're going to do an awful lot of work just to find out that you are not going to be able to earn a salary. My friend Aaron has just gone through that. Yeah, he's having to rebrand his whole business. He focused in on green tech and now he's moving over to engineers. So everything he's done for the past 6-8 months has been a waste of his time, which is unfortunate for him. So those are the big things that I would say. What's in your history? What do you enjoy doing? Is it a dying industry? Will they be able to afford what you want to charge?
Okay, so I think one of the things that we come across is that the idea of niching is quite scary because, I mean, in a generalist, an HR generalist role where you do go across the full cross-section of sort of the HR activities, HR is HR, depending, you can learn the sector, you can learn the nuances of a particular sector or business, and HR is HR. And obviously what we want to do is keep our pipeline running. People want to keep their pipeline open, and so there is an optimism around not niching and keeping your options open and being open to any possible project. But of course that can make it quite hard to actually be a thought leader and to get your messaging out there, can't it?
Yeah, 100%. I think, if you don't need to do any marketing, if you've been in business 5-10 years or whatever, and you've got a good network, people who refer work to you, etc., you probably don't need to niche. You probably don't even need to do too much marketing. It's relationship management after that. But if you are starting out or you are struggling, then for me, niching is one of the most important things that you can do. But in terms of, will this scare off other people? Yeah, I mean, it might well do, but that's okay, because rather than being marketing is hard. It's a very competitive world, especially for you guys in HR and consultancy, right? So you feel like you're going to be scaring people away if you niche down, but rather than being ignored by every business out there, why don't you become the go-to person for like 1,000 businesses? You don't need 1,000 customers. You only need 6, 10? I don't know. It depends on your business model, right? But being the go-to person for a small sector, that opens up a whole world of possibilities for you. It's like being a brain surgeon rather than a GP. Who get paid more? The brain surgeon, right? And so yeah, I would always say that it's not that you're scaring people away, it's that you become the go-to person and those other people will ignore you because people, I mean, the average human makes 30,000 decisions a day or whatever, and most of them are to focus on their world and what's important to them. So most of the time, if your marketing messages aren't breaking through those thought processes, your marketing messages are worth nothing. So if you think that you're going to scare people away, so you try and be as bland as possible, guess what? You're not going to speak to a single business out there. They are not going to grab hold of your message and say, that's the HR consultant for me. But rather than scaring them away, they'll just ignore you.
I think you've touched on a number of things which I find very interesting. The first one, if I'm to rewind to the point we're discussing before the first one, which is around technology and the impact or influence on the world of work and the world generally. Yes,
Mm,
absolutely. You talk about driverless and autonomous cars, etc. They are already here in
mm,
terms of it's a matter of whether people actually will become fully on board over a period of time or not. So yes, the
yeah,
world of work is changing. What we are doing is changing, and it will continue to evolve. I think the key thing is, as a consultant, thinking about what we do, how we do it, and it will come down to the value that we will be able to demonstrate to our customers, the value that we add to the work that we do and bring to their business. The other thing is also around this issue of nation. And I think for HR, because of what we cover is so broad, even when you niche and you say, okay, I would only work with the NHS, you still need to think around, what do I want to do or what would I like to do for the NHS? But more importantly, linked directly to what you just said, you may want to do anything for the NHS, but they may not be interested, right? Is what's in it for them. So what would the NHS need or want from an HR consultant? And I think it's being able to crack that will probably make you stand out a bit more. What do you think about that?
I 100% agree with you on that one. That's so, yeah. So for me, there is choosing the audience, and then the next step is understanding that audience. So, what drivers do they have? What problems do they have? What world do they want to live in? And once you understand that audience, that's when you can get in front of them. Because once you understand them, then you can talk to them about, as I say, the problems that they're going through. And once you understand the problems that they're going through, that's when you can step in there and solve their problems. Like, all of marketing is about solving people's problems. So whether it's HR, whether it's finance, whatever it is, you guys are going out there and you're solving a business's problem. And until you know what their problems are, you can't solve their problems. So, I think that someone will say to me right here, right now, HR, we solve disciplinaries and grievances and whatever, and it always looks the same because of employment law. And I agree with you 100%. But for me, speaking to the NHS, they probably don't need those problems solving. They would need different problem solving from an external HR consultant. So sending them information about disciplinaries and grievances, they're probably going to ignore it. That's not their problem. They have different problems.
I think that, go on, Charlotte.
So I'm gonna say it sounds very much like, actually what you need to do is know your audience. So once you've sort of thought sort of rolling back just slightly, one of the things we always say in HR Independence is do what you love and love what you do. So
yes,
you've got to, it's got to be right for you, and it's got to be something that you're going to enjoy if you're going to really hone in and spend a lot of time on it, delivering it. But it sounds like actually it's a lot more around really understanding the pain points in your audience, and perhaps doing probably quite a lot of research around that to then be able to niche down and get the messaging right.
100%. Yeah, exactly that. And the more time you spend with that audience, the more you will understand the problems that they're going through, the mistakes that they're making, and how you can actually step in and help them. I spoke to one client yesterday who told me that she wanted more engagement on LinkedIn. And I see this all the time on LinkedIn where people post that they want more engagement. I said, so why do you want more engagement? And she said, so that then I can get into conversations with them in their DMs. I said, well, skip the engagement step out, get into conversations with them in their DMs. And that opened up a whole different conversation. But that thing about wanting engagement, the HR consultants think about that frequently, so often.
Absolutely.
And it's
Absolutely, Nick. I'm not sort of jumping, but if you're on LinkedIn or you jump on LinkedIn, you see all sorts. And it can sometimes be quite scary for HR consultants rather than encouraging, because we are all very different. I mean, we are as diverse as it comes when it comes to HR consultants. And even when you manage to niche, to say a niching for me comes in two also different ways, which is, are you niching in terms of your subject expertise and what you are kind of aiming to tell somebody, hey, I am the guru in this area, or the expert in this area, or the go-to person in this area. So come and talk to me about, let's say, I'm going to just say one for the sake of it, employee engagement. So, and come and talk to me about anything and everything employee engagement, and I'm the one person to go to. So even if when you've decided that, and the other aspect of it is really, hang on a minute, now I've decided I'm the employee engagement specialist. Am I the specialist for every sector, or do I need to really narrow down? Okay, I've gone through my background, the history, the this that you've been talking about, and I've decided actually I am the employee engagement specialist for technology companies. And so I've got that. And even when you start talking to them, start engaging or publishing things on LinkedIn, your website, blogs, whatever, then you see that, oh my goodness, there are these people on LinkedIn who are constantly posting, constantly making videos, constantly doing this, constantly doing that. How am I going to compete with that? And at the same time, be able to deliver what I'm supposed to deliver. And I think that's what makes it scary, which is why engagement, especially on LinkedIn, is a huge discussion and it's a huge point of interest for our members in our community.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think people do think about engagement more than they actually need to. Marketing is more, for me, it's more about getting in front of that person, that audience. And so because you understand them, then you're able to solve their problems. So you're in a conversation with them. So for me, posting on engagement is part of a bigger strategy. Posting for engagement, posting on LinkedIn, that's not the best way of getting clients. There are so many better ways of getting clients. And, you know, social media, I think, what does the average person get? Like 1% engagement on their post, you know, maybe a like, maybe 2 likes. It's not because there's no value in that post. For me, when you post on LinkedIn, that's more about creating a perception. So that if you speak to somebody at a networking event and then they click onto your LinkedIn profile, they can see what you're all about. So for me, it's more about positioning rather than, you know, you post and then somebody comes into your DMs and starts talking to you. That's a very difficult thing to achieve. You would have to be an expert at posting on LinkedIn. So in terms of how you get clients, you know, if you were to talk about that, then lead generation is effectively what we're talking about now. Is, you know, choose one area and then get really good at it. So, you know, if you're a people person, get out there, go networking, you know, meet people, grab some hands, have some handshakes, get them onto your mailing list. If you prefer sending, you know, some mail in the post, perhaps, then do that. But again, try and get people onto your mailing list. And I think, you know, we're going down a little bit of a tunnel there. But for me, it's always get people onto your mailing list, because that's where you can really start talking to your audience. Because once you start worrying about engagement on LinkedIn, that's not something you can control. But you can control whether or not someone, you know, you can't control whether or not they open your email, but you have a much more higher engagement rate. You're able to get into a conversation, and it's much easier to monetize it than it is monetize people from LinkedIn.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit through around the sort of the process and the thought patterns and how you take somebody through sort of trying to hone in and sort of try and get them to start thinking about niching. How do we start that? So I'm an HR generalist. I cover a lot of different activities. I come to you and I say, Nick, I really need your help. You know, I'm talking to an open room. I'm not getting any engagement. You know, I don't know what to focus on. I'm, you know, looking to just get more clients, and I don't quite know where to go with this. What would be the first steps? How would we start? What would we need to do? What would you encourage us to do?
Yeah, I really love that phrase that you just used there, talking to an empty room. I was like, I'm gonna steal that. But yeah, first step, choose that target audience. As you say, in terms of, you know, you're a HR generalist, do you have to niche down in terms of what services you offer? That one's up for debate. You know, let's go back to the start of this conversation when I talked about being a copywriter, and eventually I niched down into being an email copywriter for Nike running shoes. Now, email copywriting is one element of copywriting. So if you wanted to, you could go hyper niched in what you offer. So you could just do HR engagement, and then you could just do HR engagement for the NHS. You could do that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a big audience. And if the NHS, I don't know the NHS, but if the NHS have no engagement policies, have no people in charge of engagement, then there's a huge hungry market for your services there. That's a big chunk, that's a big opportunity. So yeah, I would say that you find a target audience and you work out what their problems are, and then you solve those problems. That'd be the first step. Find an audience. Who is it that you can help? Where is the gap in the market?
Okay, so for example, the SME market. So we would sort of say, right, okay, I work with SMEs. I'm just going to do investigations. I mean, I'm thinking perhaps, Mary, some of our members quite interesting, isn't it? Because we have got some members that have niched, and we've had this discussion with them over the years. And I know you've coached a couple of them as well around sort of taking that step into niching and to get their profile changed and raised as well. I mean, we've got someone that specialises very much in 2P, which most HR consultants absolutely hate. So she's done quite well with that because she's picked an area that actually for her is a strength. It's something she enjoys. It's something that a lot of other HR consultants aren't very familiar with because it doesn't come up very often for them, because they do work in an SME market where you're not in sort of public sector and buyouts and mergers and acquisitions and things like that. And she's done incredibly well. And then I'm trying to think who else. We've got somebody who does investigations. So she specialises in specifically doing investigations, but then she's extended that to investigations training, webinars, learning how to be an investigator and things like that. So I suppose I suppose really what I'm not necessarily trying to make a point, just an observation that actually by honing down, what you then can do is potentially open up other parts of how you deliver what you know about or what you're niching on.
Yeah, 100%. So you're 100% right there. You could just niche down into a specific service. There is nothing wrong with that. As you say, you could be the Choopy queen, you could be the disciplinary queen, you could be or king. That could be your thing. That could be what you are known for. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to choose a specific sector, but being known as that, the Choopy or the mergers and acquisitions or whatever, that the HR specialist for that. Because as you say, most businesses probably don't have a specialist for that in-house. So when that project comes up, they're like, okay, let's get some help. We don't know what this is. And then they, ask around their friends. They don't know anyone. Then they have a look on Google, can't find anyone, or they do stumble across your website because you've got it set up on SEO. Maybe they look on LinkedIn, they're looking to solve their problem. They're probably, as I say, going to ask friends and family and then start looking online. And if you're niche down, if that's your brand, the mergers and acquisitions or the Choopy, whatever, you will get found for that. So yeah, 100%, you can niche down into a service.
I think, again, HR consultancy generally is a very interesting area when it comes to niching generally. Mm-hmm. And yes, Charlotte, as you've identified or as you stated, I have coached a number of members and people within the HR community generally around them and helping them in terms of choosing what they focus on, etc. But a lot of the time, I think, Nick, you said this at the beginning of this conversation, that is, by niching, you are able to carve a much stronger message that speaks directly to your target audience or to somebody who wants or needs that service that you are providing. So we are aware of people who would niche in terms of, for example, I specialize in working with SMEs who are taking on their first employees. So when someone is thinking about taking on that first employee, and whether they go searching on LinkedIn, Google, or social media, you are more likely to be up there because that's your area of specialism. Or Charlotte, if I'm to use or paraphrase your words when we're having our last podcast conversation, which is I specialize in maybe exiting people out of businesses. As much as it doesn't sound, oh my goodness, the Grim Reaper is here, you kind of, it's an area of specialism. So when somebody is thinking about exiting people out of their businesses and they want to do it in a dignified way whilst treating people with respect, because sometimes, regardless of what we do, the ultimate answer is to exit people out of businesses. And for example, redundancy situations may be one of those things where if a business is absolutely struggling and have no option, then they may have to make some people redundant. And so when you come to that, having a specialist who specializes in that area, who is really good, and making sure that process is handled fairly with dignity, etc., is very important. We do have members who specialize in outplacement. So when, for example, you get in like people leaving the organization, whether it's due to redundancy, whether it's due to, for whatever reason, they can come in, work with those people and help them on their journey in such a way that if you have a member of staff who's not had to look for a job for 15 or 20 or 30 years, and that happens, it can be quite scary. How do I go about finding a new job? How do I even go about interviewing? Because I've not had to do this for the past 15, 20 or 30 years. And so working with an outplacement specialist can also help make that easier and more straightforward for the individual. So there are several opportunities within the world of HR, and we typically say to our community, yes, we are all HR consultants, but actually there are more opportunities to collaborate than there are opportunities to compete. We're not necessarily competing with each other all the time. And it's because of the vast opportunity for niching within the HR space.
Yeah, I think, and just as you were talking, it was interesting for me as well. There was so much that you were saying that this niching is such a big topic. I've barely begun to scratch the surface with you.
I'm going to need another podcast probably in a few months' time. Okay, well, it's definitely an interesting topic, and I say it's definitely something that comes up a lot in the community, because, as I say, there's a fear factor around it, but then there's those that do it and do it really well and sort of demonstrate how good it is. And I mean, Mary and I have had numerous conversations over the years of running our own businesses and HRI, and that sometimes it's good to have a big share of a small market than to have no share of a big market, because obviously, that's what keeps your revenue coming in.
Yeah, 100%. I think, as I alluded to, as I said earlier, you don't need hundreds of clients, and the reality is most people will never want what you're offering either. So when people worry about excluding people, there are a huge number of people out there who will never hire you as a HR consultant. They will never hire a HR consultant. So choose that audience and then serve that audience, embrace that audience.
And it seems I may have found a niche without really wanting to be known as having a niche or finding a niche, because being the angel of doom is not something I want to be. But yeah, I am asked to do a lot of exits.
You have got a new logo, Charlotte, the Grim Reaper.
Oh my goodness me. Yeah, I get my Alan Sugar moments here and there, that's for sure. Okay, so I think probably what we will do is sort of wrap up, and what we always ask our guests to do when we wrap up our podcast is to say, what's your perhaps top 3 tips if there was a consultant sitting out there thinking, well, I'd really like to niche, but I don't quite know where to start. What would be your top 3 things to get them thinking about niching?
Ooh, top 3 tips. Okay. Yeah. What work do you enjoy? That's a big one. You don't want to be stuck doing things that you don't enjoy. What audience do you want to work with, or have you got experience with? You don't necessarily have to have experience with them, but you do want to have to work with them. And yeah, is it a dying industry, a growing industry? Will they be able to forward your fees as well. So there's 4 there.
Oh.
I've snuck one in.
Snuck an extra one in. Well done. Okay, well, thank you ever so much for your time. It's a really interesting conversation and debate. And as I say, it's one that we have in the community often. So it's nice to bring it onto this platform and actually share it with our podcast listeners. So thank you ever so much. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us again. We hope you'll join us next time. And if you want to get in touch with us and you'd like to become a guest on the podcast, then please do get in touch with us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Thank you, and we will talk to you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of HR Voices. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover or would like to be a guest, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us on social media or email us at hrvoices@hrindependence.co.uk. Tune in next time.